You're an educator. You love teaching. You go beyond grad school to secure a doctoral degree in educational administration. You become Regional Assistant Superintendent of Schools. You oversee more than 30 schools in the area. Quite an accomplishment. Then it all goes away. One choice, one decision unravels it all. Grab your pen and paper and take a note. There are many lessons to be learned from this educator.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you. Getting that college education.
What are you gonna do? Graduate and take some office job?
Be like everybody else.
Or will you dare do something different?
Like, be a teacher. You could be my teacher.
You got the skills.
The smarts?
Yes, you.
You could be the teacher I never forget.
That'd be cool.
Does that corporate job even have recess?
What are you gonna make of yourself?
What are you gonna make of me?
Hello and welcome to the Clarion Call Show. I'm Janice Hatcher-Liggins, your host. It's not easy to climb the top, no matter what your field or arena, but the climb is made easier when you're intelligent, determined, and hardworking. Our guest today had an amazing journey to the top of our educational system, reaching the ranks of Regional Assistant Superintendent. With one personal choice, it was all lost. Dr. Pamela Keye, former superintendent of schools, learned many lessons on her way to the top and more lessons afterwards. Dr. Keye is here with us now to share those lessons today. Dr. Keye, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I tell you, I'm excited about having you here because you do have an amazing story, an amazing journey. And so we're going to talk all about that. Let's start with your education as you were moving up the ranks. Started off as teacher, and then you wanted to continue to go on to pursue your doctorate.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that story, your journey to the top. Why were you so determined and so committed to succeed?
Well, when I was a teacher, one of the things that I noticed that there were oftentimes decisions that were being made that didn't make sense with respect to how the classrooms were working or what the children that I was serving at that time needed. Mm-hmm. And I've always been the kind of person that you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem.
Right.
And so I had a unique opportunity to become an administrator, and I went as a Danforth Fellow into a very innovative program that afforded me the opportunity to earn a master's degree in education administration. It gave me the opportunity then to become principal and ultimately regional superintendent here in Prince George's County, as you indicated. But for me, education has always been something that my mother said was for a child of poverty, your way out. Mm-hmm. So I adopted her phrase, which was education is a rich man's friend, but it's a poor person's salvation. Mm-hmm. And so I leveraged education as an educator by trying to give to children what my mother gave to me, as consistently and as broadly as often as possible.
You were well known, even in your early years of teaching, to turn schools around that were lower performing schools, even to the point of getting uniforms in the school and getting funds from outside donations for those funds.
Yes.
And even the teachers, turning them around, asking them to take etiquette classes.
Yes.
Because it made a difference.
Yes, because oftentimes no one rises to low expectations. And typically we live into what we see. And for me, the environment that I started in as a principal was the lowest performing middle school at the time. It was William H. Ruffner Middle School in Norfolk. I called it my diamond in the rough. I learned everything I learned about being a good educator, I learned from them. And so I have to say thank you to them. Uniforms was a solution to help change the environment and culture, to get children to see themselves differently, to eradicate some of the problems our children were having because they didn't have the right clothing to come to school, or children were being assaulted for the sneakers and the things that they wore. And quite frankly, to eradicate what I would call discriminatory practices by their teachers who thought less of them simply by the way they looked. Okay. So for me, if they all look the same, then you have to figure out who they are. Wonderful. And if I was going to change children, then I needed to change the adults as well, because quite frankly, professional attire has even now become a thing of the past, but you do judge a book by its cover. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be able to distinguish my educators from those parents that we served, and also to give the parents and their children something else to see and vision as possible for themselves. Respect begets respect. Operation Courtesy and Respect was the anchor to the uniforms program.
That's the name of the program.
That was the name of the program. So etiquette for teachers, just sharing and learning more about how to present yourself. For the children, it was uniforms. They designed their own logos, and firemen, policemen donated most of the clothing. Nice. A lot of the stores gave vouchers for them to buy things, parents, teachers, just people who believed that I believed.
And because of that, these test scores and all began to increase. Rise for that school.
Yes, we were the #1 middle school at the time that I was promoted from that position as principal to the regional executive director, if you will, of research and testing at the time. We were #1.
So you took it from one of the lowest performing to the top.
Yes, because poverty of the pocketbook does not mean poverty of the mind.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful. And was that what helped to lead? I know you went to Virginia Tech, was it?
Yes.
And they recruited you.
Yes, they did.
Into their program. Tell us about that.
Well, again, education was a key, and I felt that in order to keep honing my craft, I didn't stop. So if we tell children that they need to be lifelong learners, I needed to be a lifelong learner. So I actually was recruited in Virginia Beach, Virginia Tech program, and decided to continue with education administration because my dream at that time was to become Secretary of Education for the nation.
Awesome.
And while it may be a political appointment, I wanted to actually be a person that walked the talk and was able to therefore take practical experience to make manifest political strategies or laws or rules, whatever they may be, that make a difference nationwide for our children.
And you finished that program, that doctoral program, in 3 years.
Yeah, I finished it actually in less than 3 years.
My goodness.
Basically working full time, I finished the doctoral program in less than 3 years, which from my professor at that time, very few. Maybe I was the second person to actually be able to do that.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So I love to learn.
Well, it's evidently, and there are lots of kudos given to you during that time for all of your accomplishments during that time. So you also, while you were in Norfolk, you were appointed to serve on the board of a YMCA.
Yes.
And tell us about that. What was your
Well, the
involvement with
YMCA was actually across the street from one of the major housing developments that fed my school. I had somewhat developed a name for myself, obviously in the community, and did a lot of volunteering and community work, a lot of speaking. And I was asked to join the board because their mission at that time was also about the community and creating opportunities within the development to serve the population well. And it was easy walk across the street. So I accepted the challenge because my school was in a community. And you only change your school sometimes by affecting the community that's around it. And so that was one of my ways of giving back and impacting at the same time what I received.
And how long were you on the board?
I was on the board actually there for 3 years prior to my departure when I left to leave Virginia and came to Maryland to take the position in Montgomery County as community superintendent.
Okay. Okay. And then from there to Prince George's County.
Yes, so I went from Montgomery County as a community superintendent, which was similar to the position that I ultimately took here in Prince George's County as a regional superintendent. In between, I went back again to my research and testing roots. I wound up being in the accountability office, had a unique opportunity to go to Baltimore City to establish an intervention office. It lasted one fiscal year, and budget, they wound up dissolving that. And Prince George's County had an opportunity, and I'm thankful that they chose me to come, and I became the regional superintendent of what was then called Region 3.
So within that jurisdiction, which areas did you oversee?
Well, actually, where we are right now, Flowers High School was one of my high schools and where my office was located. If I define it by high schools, that might be easier for our viewing audience. I had Central High School, Largo High School, Suitland High School, and Forestville. Wow. So I had, from both ends of the spectrum in terms of economic wealth, I had both ends of the spectrum in terms of achievement. And I had basically what I would call the primary beltway schools, the urban environment, which for me was familiar grounds.
Very good. What do you think was your major accomplishment or here in this area?
Well, from the perspective of the principals that I had the pleasure to work with, I think my passion for education and leadership was contagious. We learned to respect each other, and I learned how to figure out how to leverage their strengths and use us, with us, for us, and by us for the children that we served, and to give them something to believe in. To some degree, I also allowed us to dream bigger than we were. We called ourselves Region 3. We were basically the renegades, if you will, that we knew what the charge was, but they trusted me enough to be willing to try to do things differently. I'm proud to say that many of them have also gone on to get degrees. Many of them are and have been promoted and are sitting in higher offices within the administration that currently exists. Many of them were the lifeline for myself in terms of giving hope when I was away. So for me, they are family.
Wonderful.
They're family.
And I think it was the principal at Flowers who said that nothing can stop you.
Nothing like Alima Nobles-Jones. She's since retired from Flowers, but yes, she's part of an amazing group of people who I called principals that I had the pleasure to serve. That basically were, I call them my angel network. They didn't just not forget about me. They made sure that my children were taken care of in the absence. So when we talk about the village and what it takes to take care of our children, or even what it takes to care of ourselves, we cannot forget we're all connected.
Wonderful. And
so I am thankful for them, grateful.
Now, something happened after all of that huge, wonderful life and accomplishments and impact. Something happened to begin to make it all topple.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Like most professional women, that success did not always translate into success personally. And so I wound up falling in love with a gentleman. And as a result of my involvement with him, ultimately things occurred that cost me my job, 78-month sentence in a federal prison, 2 years of conditional supervised release, and an opportunity to figure out how was I going to start again. So, ironically, I would say to you that in my conversation with the women that I had pleasures to sleep next to in a cell, I began to have a greater respect for and understanding of what was going on with the children who I was taking care of prior to my own demise to serve. I never thought that I would wind up there. I thought I did it all right, but we all make decisions sometimes, and those decisions have consequences. And the pursuit of love, for me, has been my Achilles heel, I would say. But I don't regret it, because as a result of that fall, not only did I get to learn a lot about myself and learn what it means to love again, I think I have figured out, or I'm going to be figuring out, if you will, from a reentry standpoint, how to better serve as an advocate for women who are not only just simply incarcerated and coming home, but for women who are in silent prisons due to mental and emotional issues and really just don't know how to begin again. And in order to do that, I have to be that. And so I thank you again for at least giving me an opportunity to say it out loud, because this is like the first step to, it's like, okay, you want to do this, so you have to be out in front and no longer bear what most of us have been forced to bear, which is the shame of the Scarlet F, being called felon.
Thank you for having your first conversation since you have been released here on the Clarion Call. We're going to be right back. Going to take a quick break. You're as educated as the best of them, but for many, your education no longer counts. So how do you rebuild? How do you start again with nothing? More to come. Stay with us.
It's 3 p.m. For 50 million kids across America, school's out. And for a third of these kids, they're out on their own. Out with nowhere to go. Out with nothing to do. Out all afternoon when anything can happen. But every afternoon is a chance to change America's future. All you have to do is open the door. It's time to support the Boys and Girls Clubs. Great futures start here.
Welcome back. What is it like for the successful person, the well-educated person who loses it all and has to start again to rebuild their life? We continue our conversation with Dr. Pamela Keye, former Regional Assistant Superintendent of Schools. Dr. Keye, we're back.
Yes.
Okay. I want to pick up on where we left off earlier when we were talking about you ended up serving time.
Yes.
Okay, but when that all happened, what was the reaction of the school? Well, how did you losing your job? How did that happen? Were you able to get compensation or take your leave, or how did that all work?
Well, actually, the school system has a responsibility to protect itself. And so as a result of my arrest and then subsequent media blitz about what had happened to me, and for the viewing audience and fair of them, they won't recognize Dr. Pamela Keye. They will recognize Dr. Pamela Hoffler-Riddick. And I think it's important that I say that so that in the need for transparency, I'll explain later on, if I get a moment, how I went from Hoffler-Riddick to Keye, which is part of the reentry journey conversation.
We can do that now.
But the school, I was placed on leave, and then ultimately, because at the senior level, you're at will, my contract wasn't renewed. And I wound up having to work wherever I could work while I fought for my life. And then once I found out that, in fact, although I went to trial, that I, in fact, was going to prison, and I self-surrendered, and then the journey began. But we talk a lot about mass incarceration as a national issue and the volumes of persons that are going, and it's basically the conversation has been, it's a black male issue, but it's actually also a woman's story, because in terms of gender, we are the fastest going population, even though we're the fewest in number. But from the reentry standpoint, I think it's important for the listening audience to understand that while mass incarceration is global, national, reentry is local. You are only as good in terms of your opportunity to regroup and restart as the community that you are released into. So locally, it's important where you go, even from not just state, but even down to the community and city in some cases, because of legislative issues and simply the concentration or the lack thereof of resources and persons willing to assist and help and provide you with an opportunity. But I became key because one of the things that most persons when returning home suffer with is the ability to prove who you are. And so after 9/11, and also in addition to the Patriots Act, you have to be able to show that you are who you are. So at the time when I was reemerging from prison, I could prove my birth. I was born Pamela Keye, and I had a Social Security card for Pamela Keye, but hoploritic are married names, and I couldn't prove that I was married.
Oh, wow.
So when I needed to get a driver's license, my birth was all that I could prove, and so I took it. And for me, spiritually became a metaphor for resurrection and starting again. I was born in Keye. You know, I'm returning to that and hopefully returning to and on the right path for what my life was purposed for to begin from. So while the incarceration process was a tragedy, triumph, I believe, is on its wings.
It's on its wings. And going back to the purpose for which your life was intended.
Yes.
What do you see that as being?
I'm still an educator. That is still my ministry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just educating differently.
Mm-hmm.
My subject matter is different.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point in time, how I get to advocate and use that subject matter to help others be encouraged that they can stand up, mm-hmm. to make those who are aware that they need to get up or open their eyes. But I think in terms of our community in and of itself, because of the nature that I think it has aggressively attacked us as a community, that we need to understand that you're only as good a community as the weakest population. Now you can choose to put your head in the sand and ignore its existence, but it still leaves you exposed.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found most fascinating returning home to Prince George's County was that for the size of the population here, the level of sophistication and wealth and education that exists here, I expected to find a much more robust reentry system, and to my surprise, it didn't exist.
Exactly.
And I'm coming out of the federal system, but from the state perspective, which I've begun to educate myself on, between Prince George's County and Baltimore City, the highest concentrations of, if you will, returning citizens in this state are concentrated here.
In those two areas.
In those two areas. And to ignore that, I think will be to our economic demise.
Exactly, exactly. And there's a lot of, you know, positive and productive things going on in the county, but we certainly cannot overlook the need to protect our citizens. In addition to your returning, and what did you find is the most critical need, personally? What did you find? Was it employment? Was it housing? What was your most critical need?
Well, for me, ultimately, it's employment. The reality of having my license revoked while I was in incarceration, although my crime had nothing to do with what I did, was heartbreaking. Since my return, there are restrictions. I mean, I have a way potentially to get my license back.
Wonderful.
But that's at the behest of the state boards, whether or not they decide to give it to me. And even if I get my license, it's the court of public opinion, ultimately, that will be the determiner as to whether or not I'm able to go forward.
Well, that's another area that the Clarion Call wants to focus on is civil penalties being applied to criminal offenses. There are two different court systems. One has nothing to do with the other. But because people are charged with a crime, then they also have civil penalties. Your license
was one of them.
Was one of those because your crime had nothing to do with your profession.
Correct.
But yet they were tied. So that's another thing, again, that the Clarion Call wants to look at is that's a source of perpetual punishment.
Well, yes, because it's the gift that keeps on giving. In the reentry space, it's called collateral consequences. And whether they are spurring movements such as the ban the box, or the right to vote. I mean, just simply from what state you live in and what particular administration is in power, your right to vote may or may not occur. I left, when I originally was released, I was in Florida. I would not be able to vote. Maryland had the foresight to restore those rights to those persons who are incarcerated and have completed their sentencing, and that's a gift. And so for me, when we talk about the notion of reentry, although my right to vote is a state privilege, I was charged federally, and that too was automatically removed because I wouldn't be allowed to vote necessarily in Virginia, although Virginia's now changed. I certainly would not have been allowed to vote in Florida if I stayed there where my parents were. So my return home affords me the opportunity to have greater access, but not necessarily be able to ascend as quickly as possible. So it's been a very humbling experience starting over. But there's something to shutting a door. I just kept trying to force it open. I guess that's just been my nature all along.
Yeah, you've been a fighter all along. You've been a fighter all along, and that's a good thing. That's probably why you've been able to survive while you were in. And what are your thoughts as it relates to the professional person? Do you think, would you say it's any easier with someone who has a doctoral degree, or is it easier for those who don't? Has it helped you or has it hurt you?
Wow. I would say it has hurt. First of all, I think the position of educators in and of themselves, they somehow hold us to a higher standard. I think had I been an entertainer, my ascent might have been differently, simply because there are some things that I think we are more compassionate or understanding about, depending on your career choice. But as educators, we live to, and we should, if you will, be held to a higher standard with respect to our children. I mean, I'm not going to diminish that. I do understand that within, as an at-will employee, there's always a clause that says moral turpitude, and they could say that's the umbrella that allowed you to take the license. I said, but what people don't understand is that where you fall from the ladder and your return home is the step that you're trying to get back to. And so having fallen from where I fell, the notion of getting back for me might be a lot different than a person who never stepped on the ladder or wasn't in mainstream or wasn't successful. And so my personal drive, I think, has a lot to do with it being difficult. But guess what? There's no difference because I was a professional person at my sentencing. There was no difference in where I went or was in prison. There was no difference in the expectation of what I need to do. The only difference is that there are those who would assume that because I'm educated that it would be easier. But actually there are those who tend to look down even harder.
Because you were educated.
Because I was educated. And they believe I should have known better or I should have done better. But I often say, when you point the finger, three come back to you. Exactly, be careful.
Exactly.
And none of us should be held accountable forever to your last mistake.
Exactly.
None of us, I mean, I used to tell my principals all the time, you're only as good as your last best decision, but even then, if you learn from your decision, use it to go forward.
Exactly. Quick question, how many women, would you say, what percentage of women, going back to the male impact, what percentage would you say women are in prison because of a relationship with a man?
I think I read a report in 2013 from the United States, the Sentencing Commission, that actually said 80% of the women who are incarcerated, at least federally, or in general actually, I believe, are there because of unhealthy relationships, typically with men.
Wow.
They're also there for trauma. They're also there for abuse, both sexual, mental, physical. They're there for substance abuse. So, but unhealthy relationships for women is the number one common factor.
Okay.
So in that regard, I am no better than the one that, although I had my EDD, than the one that didn't have the GED.
So what's next for you?
What's next for me is reestablishing myself here at home, allowing myself to answer the clarion call and be a reentry advocate in the space, to write about my experiences from the perspective of a woman, a professional black woman, returning home at this point in my life, and what it is like to start again, and speaking hopefully to our young women.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm
about
looking
their
forward
choices.
to watching the journey and being a part of it with you. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest today reached the top of her field academically and professionally. Yet her love for the wrong man led her to make a choice that ended it all. And she's not alone. Most women in prison are there because of their relationship with a man. So listen up, ladies. Blind love is not smart. Dr. Keye taught us valuable insights today. Learn your lesson from Dr. Keye. After all, she still is an educator. Reforms are greatly needed to end perpetual punishment. Once someone serves their time, they've paid their debt to society. As it is now, the person may be out of prison, but they are still serving time. Join us and help make reform. Give us a call or send an email to get involved. That's it for now, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time, won't you, for the Clarion Call. Until then, I'm Janice Liggins. Blessings to you.